If you're looking to add more diversity to your videos, using a slider is a great way to get extra yet subtle movement and depth in your shots. There are hundreds of creative ways to use a slider, and it's a useful tool to have in your arsenal for adding that special touch to your videos. Hello everyone, my name is Spencer Ryan, and today we are going to talk about the Neewer Motorized Carbon Fiber slider. And if you're in the market for a motorized slider, you're going to want to pay attention to this video. However, stay tuned because I'm going to break down the good and the bad. So I've been in the market for a slider for about 6 months now, and I haven't been able to decide which one to get. I've always thought that adding a slider to my arsenal would basically come in handy in a lot of different situations when it comes to like walkthroughs, real estate videos, interviews, B-roll, all kinds of different stuff. So when Neewer reached out to me and offered to send me their motorized slider, I was stoked. I have a lot of Neewer products already. I love them, so it was basically a no-brainer for me, and I said, yeah, go ahead and send it. So shout out to Neewer for sending this to me and making this video possible. Now, I do want to preface this video by saying I've never used a motorized slider before. I've only used a manual slider, and I think that's important information to know. I'm a complete beginner when it comes to using sliders like these. So this is the Neewer motorized slider with carbon fiber rails. As you can see, it has 4 legs here that are completely adjustable. You can adjust the height. In the middle, it has a rail, and you can adjust this rail, which will actually rotate the platform where the ball head sits to give you tracking and panning motions. Now the ball head sits here. I used a Joby GorillaPod ball head because I didn't have anything else, but this uses a standard 3/8 screw mount. And this is the motor. It attaches using 2 Allen wrench screws and operates by using this belt here. It is important to note that you can actually use this slider completely manual. You can take the motor off, you can take the belt off, and you can use it as a manual slider, which we'll talk about more soon. So the motor is controlled by an app on your phone. When you initially power up the motor, it's gonna pair with the app on your phone, and then you'll set the A-B point. So you'll set the A point, the B point, and the motor will actually go back and forth between those points. There's different ways to shoot. It has a video mode, a time-lapse mode, which actually controls the shutter of your camera. And then it also has automatic round trip shooting, which means it'll bounce back and forth between the A and B modes. So when using the slider, the motor is pretty quiet. However, it's not quiet enough to use a microphone on your camera while operating. There is a slight little hum to it. However, I don't think you'll need to use your microphone on the camera. If you're in an interview situation, you'll probably be running lines anyway. It also delivers relatively smooth shots, in my opinion. There are a couple of things that we're going to talk about in a couple of minutes, but for the most part, the slider is extremely smooth. Personally, I love the feeling of the slider. I think it was really well constructed. I think Neewer did a really good job when they constructed this slider. No part feels cheap, no part feels flimsy. It's not super heavy, and the awesome thing is it came with a case. Now, it's important to note that the slider will not fit in the case with the motor on. You're gonna have to actually take the motor off, and it has its own separate case. So who do I think this slider is for? Well, I think this slider is good for anyone who's looking for a beginner slider but doesn't want to spend the big bucks. This is actually a great slider at a great price. It's great for anyone who's looking for a slider on a budget. When you look at the competition, most sliders run anywhere from $350 to $800. This one comes in at $279.99 on Amazon with free Prime shipping. I think at that price point, you really can't beat it. It's great for someone who's looking for something just like this on a budget. So with all of that said, it's time to talk about the bad. As I mentioned earlier, I think Neewer did a really good job constructing this slider. However, there are parts of this whole system that I actually don't feel like Neewer created at all. As I mentioned before, I have Neewer products, I love their stuff, but this is an interesting kind of confluence. I really believe that the motor was actually developed by a third-party company and not Neewer. When you actually get the slider, the only thing that has the Neewer branding on it is the slider itself. The case does not, the motor does not, nothing else has Neewer branding on it. We're gonna dive into the negatives about the motor itself, but I just really feel like Neewer and whoever engineered the motor did not have a good fluent relationship with the engineering of this device. So the first problem is the motor itself. It's really actually difficult to mount. When I was mounting it, it uses these 2 Allen screws. The Allen wrench that was provided was really not a good option, and I had to use my own. It's really hard hard to get these screws in because the motor itself blocks the Allen wrench. My second problem is the app. When you dive into the app, you're going to see that it kind of looks like it was cheaply made. It doesn't look aesthetically pleasing. It's not easy to use, especially when it comes to the time-lapse mode. It's really hard to understand the features of time-lapse mode so that you can adjust the shutter correctly. And it needs to be noted that most of this comes with user instructions, but they're all really difficult to understand and not very helpful. As I mentioned earlier, when you open the app, you have to set your A/B points initially. One problem that I was running into is if I was on one side of the slider and I set it as my A point, for some reason it wouldn't allow me to go backwards and set the next B point. So what I would have to do is I would have to force close the app, then open it again, run it backwards, set the A point on a specific side of the slider, and then set my B point from there. That was extremely annoying, super time consuming, and not very practical for someone who's on a professional shoot.
So when you initially set up the slider, you have to set the A/B point. One thing that I'm finding is I'm all the way at the edge of the slider right now. I set the A point and it doesn't, like, it only goes one way. It doesn't let you go the other way for some reason. So I have to turn it off, try and get it to slide to the other side, and then set that point and then go the opposite way. It's complicated to explain, but basically if you look at the slider right now, it refuses to go backwards. It only wants to go forward, and obviously it can't, and it just stops there. So I don't know.
The last problem that I have with this slider is the way they developed the rotating ball head mount. So as you can see on the bottom here, there are 4 wheels that control the ball head mount, and it uses this kind of rail here in the middle. As I mentioned before, the rail is fully adjustable. So what you would do is you would kind of unscrew the top and then kind of make the rail in the middle a little bit diagonal, and as the slider is moving, it would rotate that platform, thus giving you that panoramic motion or tracking motion when your camera's mounted to it. The problem is not everyone needs this all the time. So it took me a really long time to figure out, but I had to adjust the rail and make sure that it was perfectly centered and perfectly straight. And then there's this little screw here that you have to tighten, and that's supposed to stop this from rotating. The problem is sometimes it's still rotated. When I was in the middle of my shots, you would get these jerky movements where the camera would just jerk left or jerk right, and that was not good because a lot of times when I'm using a slider, I want it to stay facing the same direction. So if I have to give my honest opinion, I think the whole motorized portion of this slider was not given a lot of thought. With that said, I don't think it impedes your ability to use it. I just wish Neewer would have worked a little bit more with the motor, maybe created it themselves. If they did create it themselves, it doesn't really feel like it. I wish there was more thought put into it. So with all of that said, would I recommend it? The answer is yes. At this price point, it's really hard to get a slider that's motorized. As I mentioned before, most motorized sliders run you about $350 to $800, and this one comes in at $280. So it's a great slider. It's great for entry level. If you just need to add a little bit more diversity to your shots or add some depth, get that foreground background action, this is a great option. I don't think any of the negatives that I mentioned can prevent you from using it. However, it is a little bit inconvenient and you will have to work around it. Another thing is, if necessary, you can just take the motor off and use it as a manual slider, which is super awesome of itself because like I said, this is a really good slider. If you're looking for an entry-level motorized slider at a great price point, I really don't think you need to look any further. You can find the link in the description below if you want to pick one up, and be sure to use the discount code below as well so that you can get a discount. So thanks again to Neewer for sending me this slider and making this video possible. As I mentioned before, I use a lot of their products, and I think they're great for photographers and filmmakers who are on a budget. And I want to say thank you to you for taking the time to watch this video. If you found it useful, please give it a like, and if you haven't already, subscribe so that you can see more videos like this. And as always, I'll see you guys in the next video.